Well, the last 2 or 3 months, Ramie, we spent talking about Kevin Durant. And really, it feels like the last 2 or 3 years.
Since I got here.
Yeah.
Like literally since I got here.
KD drama all over the place. And we heard it all, right? We heard that KD wanted out. And then he had this meeting with Joe Tsai, the team owner, going back a couple of weeks ago, where he said it's either me or, Marks and Nash. Ooh, he drew the line in the sand.
And then there was that report that he would retire.
Yes.
He would retire before coming back to play for the Brooklyn Nets, which he shot down immediately on Twitter.
He quickly
will believe anything.
He quickly shot that down on Twitter. So he was supposedly drawing the line in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
It's either me or them. And apparently not so much anymore because everybody got together yesterday, a Yaya Brotherhood meeting somewhere. And I don't know if they shared s'mores and, had drinks or whatever they did, but apparently everybody now feels good, or at least good enough
Kumbaya
to say that Durant is going to stay in Brooklyn, ... for now. Here was Shams Charania on the Pat McAfee show earlier today.
From everything I've been told, that the outcome of that meeting yesterday between Kevin Durant, his business manager, Rich Kleiman, everyone from the Nets, Sean Marks, Steve Nash, ownership, they all agreed that it's in everyone's best interest, both sides, to move on. No trade was happening. It was clear. And so for Kevin Durant, if he really wanted to get out of Brooklyn, this was going to get even uglier. You had training camp coming up in 1 month, and that was really going to be the point. Kevin Durant was going to have to decide, do I show up to camp? Do I show up disgruntled, or do I just hold out? And before it even got to that, Kevin Durant met and decided that he was going to stay a Brooklyn Net. I think both sides looked around from everything I've been told, and the outcome of that meeting was this is in everyone's best interest.
This feels like a meeting that should have happened a long time ago, and Shams said as much today with Pat McAfee.
I do believe that feelings were aired out in that meeting yesterday. I don't know exactly how long that meeting went, but anytime you have a meeting with all those stakeholders, and this is the first time they met since the Nets regular season and season ended on April 23rd. This meeting probably should have happened months ago, guys. Like, this should have happened right after the season ended, when Kevin Durant was displeased with how the year went. There were a lot of issues, underlying concerns that happened after you finished that year. This meeting should have happened then. It takes 2.5 months to happen, and I guess better late than never.
Did they know that KD was upset? Remember we played the audio after they got swept by the Celtics, and somebody asked KD about Steve Nash continuing as the head coach, and he just did nothing but defend the coach and throw all the excuses out there that he could come up with? Did they even know that this guy was that upset?
I would think that there was at least something spoken behind closed doors. Kevin Durant, I mean, and we'll talk about this later. He will clap back at absolutely anybody, everybody, and nobody on Twitter. But when it comes to like basketball things in house, Kevin Durant isn't looking for drama. Kevin Durant has never been one to really stir things up or rock the boat. He left Oklahoma City. But, he just went and explored free agency and left and had nothing but good things to say on his way out the door. Same thing in Golden State. I think that was him being the good soldier at the podium that day and saying, oh, no, I love Steve Nash. Everything is still great here. But there had to be something spoken behind closed doors, and it was kept behind closed doors until this thing started to get ugly. And then I would guess somebody with the Nets put it out there that Kevin Durant said, it's either me or Marks and Nash, just so the organization could save some face and kind of throw Kevin Durant out there to say he's the one who's causing this problem and creating this standoff between us and our biggest superstar.
Let me tell you what happened in Brooklyn. I don't even have to be in Brooklyn. I don't have to be in these meetings. I don't have to have phone calls or texts with Kevin Durant or Kyrie or Sean Marks or Steve Nash or Joe Tsai or anybody.
I mean, that would be good if you had.
It would have been great.
You're right.
Would have been ahead of this. But
Yes.
let me tell you what happened in Brooklyn. Kyrie wanted a long-term deal with the Nets on his terms. The Nets said no. That set all of this in motion. KD eventually got to the point, hey, if you're not going to stand by my guy, one of my BFFs, then I want out. That was trying to leverage the Nets into bending backwards and giving Kyrie what he wanted. That didn't work. The Nets went out. The Nets talked to teams. The Nets talked to teams asking for so much that they knew there was no team that was going to be able or willing to give them what they were asking for. So KD goes back. KD's frustrated. So it's either them or me approach to the ownership. And the ownership called the bluff. The ownership looked at KD and they said, this is not the kind of guy that's going to sit out. This is not the guy who's going to pull a Ben Simmons or an Anthony Davis. He's not going to come up with a hangnail and he sits for 3 months. He is too much of a basketball player. This was Brooklyn's plan. Ramie, I talked about it going back several weeks ago. The Nets knew they did not want to trade Kevin Durant. They want to get rid of Kyrie. There's no doubt. But they did not want to get rid of Kevin Durant. So they knew if they asked for such a ridiculous price, they could go out there and say, hey, KD, we tried. We tried. A deal couldn't come together. Mm-hmm. Why don't you just stay here? We got a chance to win a championship. Look at this team that you have. If we do trade you to a team, they're going to be gutted. Let's just make this work.
I'm not saying you're wrong. That might have been the plan from the beginning. But I also think it's entirely possible that the Nets were open to trading Kevin Durant when he came to him and demanded to get out. Because, and you've talked about this before, Nick, sometimes, and especially when you're talking about somebody the caliber of a Kevin Durant and the sway and the influence that he holds, if a guy doesn't want to be there, as great a talent as he is, and you just signed him to a new 4-year contract, you maybe don't want him around. It's maybe more trouble than it is to try and keep him in the building than it's worth.
The only way they were going to keep him is if a team just went crazy.
But I don't even think it's crazy necessarily. I think it's entirely possible they went out there looking for value and would have traded Kevin Durant if they got value for him, but the value changed with the Rudy Gobert trade, or at least the Nets thought that the value changed with the Rudy Gobert trade. That's a trade that was like an inflection point, I think, in NBA trades. And they happen in every sport every few years. The last one in the NBA involved the Nets when they gave up everything to get Garnett and Paul Pierce from the Boston Celtics and try and put that thing together. The Alex Rodriguez contract was that kind of deal in baseball where all 29 other owners pulled back and went, whoa, what are we doing here right now? You know what I mean? The Herschel Walker trade in football made NFL owners and front offices around the league do that.
Right.
I think it's entirely possible the Nets were open to trading Kevin Durant, but Rudy Gobert and the Jazz and the Timberwolves broke the NBA trade market so badly that the Nets couldn't find what they thought Kevin Durant was worth out there.
See, I would be prone to agree with you on that if this stuff didn't happen, early in the process. Like we were told, hey, the Nets want not one but 2 all-stars. Hey, the Nets don't want just, 3 or 4 picks. They want 5 picks. Hey, the Nets don't just want Jaylen Brown. They want Marcus Smart, another rotation player, maybe 2 other rotation players, and multiple picks on top of it. It got to the point where you were reading these stories. There was a story yesterday from Shams saying, oh, look, the Memphis Grizzlies are interested in Kevin Durant. And you read the story and it says, well, they're not willing to offer Jaren Jackson Jr. or Desmond Bane. Well, they're not really interested in Kevin Durant then. Like if you're legitimately interested in Durant, then you put one of those guys on the table. Celtics put the best deal on the table by all reports, and that was Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and a pick. I think teams looked at this and said, well, first of all, we don't know if we can trust this guy because he just signed a 4-year extension. Now he wants out. Secondly, is this just a leverage play by the Nets? The Nets played this perfect. They were not going to give up Kevin Durant unless they were given an embarrassment of riches. And they knew they had the leverage with that contract, and they knew that Kevin Durant was going to play because that's how he is wired.
But
he's not going to quit.
Do you think that was the plan from the beginning, or do you think they went out and explored the market, and because of partly how much it's changed because of Rudy Gobert, they came back to Kevin Durant and said, look, we can't find enough value for you out there, and we're not putting ourselves behind the 8 ball to trade you. So if you don't want to play for us, we're going to have a standoff when training camp comes, but that's up to you.
I think both can be true. I think they could look at this and say, all right, this is Kevin Durant. We're going to ask for the moon. And we're going to ask for the moon knowing that we're unlikely going to get the moon because he's already limited our options by coming out and saying Phoenix and Miami. And this is all going to circle back and come back to us. I think they knew from the beginning that it was very, very, very unlikely that any team in the NBA would meet their demand because it just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense for the Celtics to give up too much. It didn't make sense for Miami with the Ben Simmons contract. We went through that. Mm-hmm. I think they knew that. So it was, hey, we're going to ask for everything. And if we get everything, then yeah, we can live with that trade. But we know where this is headed. We know these teams are not going to do that. That's how I feel. I want to get people's thoughts on this. Again, Kevin Durant is going to stay in Brooklyn, ... for now.
No, it's long-term. You didn't see that?
Yeah.
It's a long-term marriage.
I want to get to the idea of this being a long-term marriage because somebody tweeted that. And boy, oh boy. Are we making those jumps that quickly? Do we make the jump that quickly that we go from he wants out, it's either them or me, to it's going to be a great marriage? Want your thoughts? 916-339-1140 is the text line. YouTube, check us out, Sactown Sports.